Morning, everyone. Happy Canada Day. Nice to see you all here. I'm not up here to model Mr. Canada or anything like that. If you're going to find out something this morning, it's probably more liable to be that there's no fool like an old fool. Over the last while, Pastor Kelly's been going through the book of Joshua. And we've seen that Joshua has sort of had his ups and downs in terms of his what's happening in his life. And he came into Jericho and without any difficulty in his part or without any great plan or scheme or anything, he defeated Jericho and all the inhabitants there. And all he had to do really was listen to God and follow the orders. And because if he had to try to do something or if he thought that was done on his own, I'm sure the people that were in the battle with him and in the army with him must have been shaking their head when he told them how they were going to take Jericho. But he followed through with what God had asked him to do. But then shortly after, he went on another battle at Ai, and he did it a little bit differently. In the first battle, when he was taking Jericho, he had some communication with God. And God told him that I will deliver Jericho into your hands. And so really he didn't have to do anything. He already had the battle won. God was going to give it to him. And all he had to do was, go for a walk. Kind of had to walk around the city. And the walls came tumbling down. Later on, he went to do the same thing at the other town at Ai. And what he did it a little differently there. He took it on himself to organize the battle. And he sent his men out to look it over and see what they should do, or if it was possible to defeat these people, and so on and so forth. And they came back and told him, that it wasn't a problem. There were not very many people there. They weren't good warriors, and so on and so forth. And not even to send the whole army up. Give them a rest, because this was going to be an easy thing to do to conquer Ai. And that's where they got defeated. Because I think what happened was that Joshua kind of took the thing into his own hands. And he said, I did a good job at Jericho. Now all I got to do is sort of the same thing here. I can take it on my own and win the battle. And of course that isn't what happened. And there was the other story that God wasn't with them because of the sin of Aaron and so on. But the thing is that we tend to take things on our own. And when he went back to Ai later on and he defeated them, it was because, again, God told him that he would deliver them into his hands. And that's what God does for us. That was Joshua's story, a little bit of it. There was a few episodes. And we all have a story. We all have a story, every one of us. And we have to understand how this story sort of works. We have to put it together in certain ways. And if, I'm in, like with my story, if I'm talking about my story, then it should be turning out to my advantage. I mean, if you're writing a story, or if you're putting a story together, then, when I write a story, I end up being the hero. I conquer all the bad guys or whatever. Like I want to be the hero of the story. And sometimes that's where the story goes awry, is we have to remember that my story and your story and our story, it's not about me. My story's got nothing to do with me. This is God's story. God is the hero. He is our hero. God is the hero of each person's story. And if I want to accomplish something, then I have to be led by God. Otherwise, I can accomplish nothing, because I am nothing. I am a creature of God's. And so I can't plan to go out and conquer this city. I have to go to God and ask him, okay, God, what do you want me to do with this? What is wrong? What am I doing wrong? So that's how, that's how we get messed up in, and if I start looking at myself and looking at my story, when I started off, I grew up, I guess, in a relatively good family. They were churchgoers and religious people and devoted to God, and there was nothing really terribly wrong with it. But I didn't think it was I didn't feel comfortable, and I didn't think it was turning out the way I wanted it to, because I wasn't getting or seeing happen the things that I wanted. Like, we didn't have a lot of money, so I wasn't satisfied. I wasn't comfortable because I thought we should have more. Or that, we look at our parents, I look at my parents, and then I look at the parents across the street. And, the grass is always greener on the other side of the fence. There's always something else that we want. And so we have to, that's where we kind of, what happens is that we kind of decide that we have to change this. This plan is not, it's not mine. And I have to start to change it. And what happened, and we do a lot of this unconsciously. I mean, we don't sit down and put it on paper and pen and paper, because somebody might find it and think we're crazy. But we do have it in our head. And we do look forward to good things always happening to us. And we look forward to being the hero of our story. And we look forward to things turning out the way I plan. And what happened with me as we went along, and like I said, we don't plan it. A lot of it is unconscious, And I remember when I was quite young, and I don't know what that means, probably 12, 13, 14, in there someplace. I remember with my cousins, and we had come across, well, actually I don't think we came across, I think they just stole it from someplace. But we came across, we had this bottle of beer. And we were young because there was 3 or 4 of us. And that's all we had. But there was something happened after I drank whatever my 2 tablespoons full were or whatever. Something happened. And all of a sudden I had a whole new perspective on this story of mine. There was something about it that was etched in my brain forever. And it sort of said to me or told me or let me know that it's not just by following the story that it will turn out right, but there's another way that I can start to feel comfortable. Now, that didn't happen right away. Like, I didn't go out and sit down and kept on drinking from then on. But, you know, that memory was there. That feeling was there. And it was, you know, probably a few years later that, you know, I drank again. But what happened is that gradually I found out, or I discovered, or I remembered, that when I drank, I felt better. And the story looked better. I could do things that I hadn't done, and I could, you know, I was free. You know, I didn't have any restrictions. Of course, this was all imaginary, but I still had, like, for me, it was real. It might not be real for anybody else, but for me it was, because this was my story and I was putting it together. And so I really didn't get into a lot of serious drinking until probably later in high school and then in college. But what happened, it didn't matter when it was or where it was. It took on a greater and greater importance in my life. It became something that was almost necessary. And it became the only time, the only way that I really felt good about myself. That, you know, this story was starting to turn my way, finally. I found the solution to the problem. And God didn't have to be the hero. I found out how I could be the hero, how I could feel like I could climb any mountain or accomplish any task. And you can do, you know, in your mind, or in my mind anyway, I could do just about anything at all. And part of that is forgetting that God is the hero of the story. And so we start to move away from what we believe, and we start to move away to doing things that we know are not necessarily the things that we should be doing. And so that's, you know, like I said, I didn't plan it. I didn't even know it was happening exactly. But, you know, it was so important, and it did so much that, you know, in life, there's always something that doesn't make us feel good, and there's always something that's not going right. And so what happens is you start to use it more and more, because it is a solution for sure. And for me, it always worked. And so you're never disappointed. Of course, that's not reality, but that's how I felt about it. Because, you know, as long as I drank, it didn't matter what happened. It wasn't disappointing. And so that, you know, by the time I graduated from college, in my view today, I was probably a full-fledged alcoholic by then. I took the right courses in university, and that's where it got me. But, you know, that's probably where I was. But at the same time, you know, if you drink that much, your thinking gets, well, it's not the brightest thinking in the world. But it was time to make a decision about what I wanted to be when I grew up. And like I said, you know, when I was growing up, we had a good family. You know, it was as good as anybody else's. But it wasn't good enough for me. But the other thing that was going on was there was sort of this, I don't know what it was. My mother and I sort of had a psychological warfare going on of some kind. And, it seemed to me that, she was never happy with what I did, or she was, she wasn't in tune with where I was. But anyway, she was an Irish Catholic mother, and her greatest desire was to have a son who was a priest. And so I thought that one through, and came to a logical conclusion that maybe if I did that, I could win this psychological warfare, that would bring peace between us, or whatever it was that wasn't there. And so that's what I did, believe it or not. And I got her back on my side, I guess, until they started adding adjectives to, non-complimentary adjectives, I might add, to the Father de Corsi thing. And it was nice to have a priest in the family, but a drunken priest didn't go over quite as well. So that created some small things in the family, and it also created some small things in the church. In fact, while I was I went in the priesthood, and I was a priest for 7 years in New Brunswick, and I did a relatively good job, I guess. I don't know. It depends on what you call a good job. But what happened, I went to treatment, I think, twice while I was there. The bishop didn't like some of the behaviors that were going on, and he didn't want his priest spending too many more nights in jail and stuff like this. So anyway, I went to, I think I went twice for sure. But anyway, it doesn't matter. But after a while, it catches up with you, and so I just decided that New Brunswick wasn't big enough for both of us, so I left, and I ended up here in Winnipeg, and so I was looking for a job. This is another, people who you have to be ingenious to be that stupid or something. But I ended up, I had to look for a job. And so I decided, what is it that I know best? And the only thing that I knew outside of the church was drinking. So I decided I applied for a job with the Addictions Foundation, and I became an alcoholism counselor. Tell people how not to drink. And so I worked there for quite a while, actually. Well, while I was there, oh yeah, there was something happened there. While I was there, like I said, this stuff piles up on you, and it gets to the point after a while where, everybody knows except you. And so everybody did know except me. And so my family and some of my friends and some people from work and so on, they ganged up on me one day. And I had to, they did, maybe you've seen it on TV, they do an intervention. And that's where all the people who don't want you to drink gather together to get even with the one who wants to drink. And they just, tell you how miserable I was making their life. And they gave me some alternatives, some options. There was actually only two. One was to get treatment, and the alternative to that was to find another place, another boarding house, another place to live. So that was all there was. And at that time, when your whole world kind of comes apart for a few minutes, and so you say yes to anything just to get out of the room because the walls are closing in too fast. And so I went to treatment that time, and that was back in the 90s, early 90s. And fortunately, for some reason, I came back and I didn't drink. In some way, over time, it wasn't because I had a good relationship with God or anything. But see, what it is that sometimes when I'm not following God's script, or I don't like God's plan for me, God still loves me. And it doesn't matter where I'm at, He still pursues me. And He still does everything He can to show that He loves me. And He keeps bailing me out. And He keeps rescuing me. And He keeps bringing me back. And so that's what happened. I don't know. It was a little bit like the walls of Jericho. Why did they fall down, or how did they fall down? Or what happened? It wasn't anything that Joshua did, except Joshua followed the instructions. But he didn't have the power to bring those walls down. And I didn't have any power to stop drinking. I didn't even know if I wanted to stop drinking, really. The other times I had treatment, I didn't want to stop drinking because I didn't have any place else to go. Because, see, when you're drinking or taking drugs or doing that kind of a lifestyle, that answers your questions. That makes your life comfortable. That's the kind of story that I want to write, where no matter what happens, hey, it turns out good, and I managed to solve all the problems, or, I do all the right things. And so that's what we're fighting against. And it's hard to do that. Because, see, to follow God's orders is something we don't want to do. We don't want to be still and wait patiently for the Lord. We hate doing that. It drives us crazy. You ever go to a big event and they have a moment of silence for somebody who died or somebody who did something or whatever? They say, we will have a minute of silence. Have you ever seen that last for a minute? 15 seconds and they start, and then they start talking and so some of them get to 30 seconds or 45, but they never go a minute. You couldn't keep people quiet for a minute. It doesn't matter. They want to do something. They want to talk. And if you go in someplace, I do it sometimes in a classroom kind of setting, to stay quiet for a minute, I don't say anything. I just don't say anything. And somebody will always talk. They'll open up, they'll ask a question, they'll get the conversation. I could go to class with nothing prepared at all and run for an hour, because the people that are there, they won't stay quiet for a minute. And see, that's why we have so much trouble in our relationship with God. We haven't got enough sense to shut up. Like, the first times I went to treatment programs, I decided how I was going to recover, what I'm going to do, what needs to be done, what time I'm going to do it, so on and so forth. It has nothing to do with God, and so it doesn't work. Because I can't do anything without God. And God is the hero of my story, and He's the hero of your story and everyone's story. It's the story of what God does in each one of our lives. And He will do whatever we want Him to do. It doesn't. How many times have we asked God over and over for the same thing? Or for Him to bail us out of the same problem? Or for Him to heal the same hurts? And He always comes. He'll do it whatever we want. You know? But we have to learn that we don't have the power to write this story even. Only God can do it. See, God knows the plan for us, and we have to trust him. The same as Joshua trusted him when he said, here's how you will conquer Jericho. And he followed it the way it was supposed to be done. And what happened? He was victorious. It all came out the way he wanted. And that's the same thing with whatever the problem is. With my drinking, that's how you can do it. That's the only way you can do it. It's to recover from addiction is probably the easiest thing in the world. Because you don't have to do anything. You don't have to do anything except give up. And that's the way with most of our problems. If we would give up and quit trying to solve them and give God a little bit of elbow room, they'd be gone. That's what God is all about. He's about solving my problems. And so, you know, that's what I have to learn. God doesn't want, you know, when he talks about the plan he has for us, he doesn't tell us what the plan is. And that's frustrating because we don't know where he's taking us most of the time or what kind of a script he's written for us. But he tells us one thing for sure, that plan is never going to harm us. The plan, whatever goes on in our life, if our lives are in the hands of God, it's not going to hurt us. It may not turn out today exactly like I thought it would, but it will eventually turn out the way it's supposed to. You take, you know, my alcoholism. Like, I didn't like that, really. I didn't want to stop drinking, but I didn't like, you know, where it had gone to. And there was nothing sort of to do with it. And so, you know, it wasn't a good thing. But when I look at that from today's perspective, that was probably, and I've said this to many people, you know, that was probably the greatest gift that God ever gave me. He didn't make me become an alcoholic, but he gave me free will and allowed me to abuse it. But as a result of that, God takes whatever any of us have done. It doesn't matter how good it is or how bad it is or how, you know, terrible it is or how much we regret it or anything else. None of that matters. But God takes it. If we want to give it to God, he'll take it and he'll work it out to its own end, its own purpose, where he wants it to be. And he gave me an opportunity. When I said to God, I don't want to drink anymore and I'll do whatever it takes. From that time on, he took what I had, which wasn't anything, and he turned it into an opportunity where I could talk to people who didn't know anything about God every day, where I could work with people who had all kinds of addiction problems. And, you know, I could meet the nicest people that there were around. And I could make a living at it. And I could grow in my relationship with God. And I didn't have to do anything. I just had to say, I'm tired of being an alcoholic. He said, it's about time. But you don't have to do stuff. You have to be available for God. And when he walks in, he'll do all the work. I don't know how to do most of the stuff I do. I don't know how to do it. I didn't know how to do it originally. I didn't take any training in a lot of it. But when God comes along, if he wants you to do something, he doesn't ask you to do things and not give you the power to do them. He doesn't put desires in your heart and not give you an opportunity for fulfillment. God doesn't go around playing games with us. God loves us. And we know that there's nothing that you or I can do that's going to be bad enough that God won't love us. That kind of a thing doesn't exist. Because God does love us. And nothing, absolutely nothing, can separate us from the love of God. And so everything that's in your story and my story is known by God. And he's got it in hand. And he's got control of it. And, when it happens today, I may not like, what happens today. But God will take it and make it what we want it to be. And things that, some gift that is. It may not look like a gift yet. But see, we don't know the whole plan. See, we see now like through a mirror. We don't see clearly what's going on in the big picture, in the long run. We don't know. We know now in part. But then we will know fully. So there is a positive ending to all of this. It doesn't matter how miserable it seems. When Paul was praying because God had given him a thorn in his side, he didn't like that. And so he asked God to remove it. And 3 times he asked him. And God simply said, my grace is sufficient for you. And he said that, it's not going to kill you. It may hurt a bit, but, I'm looking after it. And in that section, in the message, this rendition of that section in 2 Corinthians, 2 Corinthians, this is how he talks about it. And Paul had received all kinds of revelations, and he had been taken up to the 3rd heaven and this sort of thing. And, he was still had a thorn in his side. And he says, because of the extravagance of these revelations, and so I wouldn't get a big head, I was given the gift of a handicap to keep me in constant touch with my limitations. I was given the gift of a handicap. And that's what my alcoholism was. It was the gift of a handicap. So that I would be in touch with my limitations. I would be reminded that I'm not God, even though I may tell people I am, or try to make them believe it. But I was given the gift of a handicap. Satan's angels did their best to get me down. What he in fact did was push me to my knees. No danger then of walking around high and mighty. At first, I didn't think it was a gift. And let me tell you, I didn't think it was a gift. And begged God to remove it. 3 times I did that. Then he told me, my grace is enough. It's all you need. My strength comes into its own when you are weak. When you can't do anything about it, then God steps in. When you tell him that you want him to step in, he'll be there. Once I heard that, I was glad to let it happen. He was okay with his handicap. I quit focusing on the handicap and began appreciating the gift. It was a case of Christ's strength moving in on my weakness. Now I take my limitations in stride and with good cheer. These limitations that cut me down to size, abuse, accidents, opposition, bad breaks. Whenever they happen, I just let Christ take over. And so the weaker I get, the stronger I become. And that's how we put our story into perspective. Doesn't matter how good or bad it sounds or seems, that's what we do. If we give it to God. Joshua, when he conquered Jericho, he didn't have to do anything except believe. He really had to believe that God would do what he said he would do. And it doesn't matter where you or I are at today. If we want it to turn out, we have to believe that God will do what we ask him to do. We have to believe. That's all. We don't have to do any work. We don't have to work up a sweat or anything like that. We can just sit around, It's like when Joshua met the angel before he conquered Jericho, And the angel said, you don't have to do anything. He was, I got to get this, I got to conquer Jericho, I got to do this, get the army organized and so on. No. He said, take your shoes off and sit down and relax. There's nothing to do. So please just leave things in God's hands. He's a wonderful God. And he'll do anything in the world for you or me. All we got to do is ask him and let him do it. Don't go interfering. If as soon as we start interfering, it'll be like the battle at Ai. They started, he sent the soldiers out and he decided, I know how to do it. And we see this all the time in treatment programs. People are doing well. And so then they forget that they're not supposed to be doing all this stuff. And, they have a relapse. People have relapses because they don't want to listen to God anymore and mind their own business. That's where we get into most trouble. We haven't got enough sense to mind our own business and let God mind his. And when we do that, we don't have the power to do God's business. Only he has the power to do that. So we have to let him do it. And, I can't, the only problem with it overall is, I've been sober for about 20 years or something. And, but I can't take any credit for it. So that's kind of tough because nobody can pat you on the back because you didn't do anything. But God did a lot in my life and in everybody's life. And he'll do a lot in your life, but you have to give him permission. You have to let him know that you want it and let him do what he wants to do and not be going around fighting with him all the time because you can't win the battle anyway. He always wins. I've tried it enough times. I can tell you for sure that you can't win a battle against God. He always wins the battle because he loves us enough to take us where we need to be. So have a great Canada Day. God bless you all. And I hope you know what an old fool really like now.